Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be discussing Stage 2 of the UbD or Understanding by Design template. Stage 2 is going to be all about determining what acceptable evidence you are going to use to assess your students. You're going to want to make sure that you have already completed Stage 1, as that is where you align your standards with what you are going to teach. Stage 2 is about using those standards in order to assess your students. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello. Once again, I'm going to be discussing Stage 2 today of the UbD template. Stage 2 is all about determining your acceptable evidence that you will be using. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first part in Stage 2 refers to section in your book, Module G and J in the textbook. And you want to make sure that you've already completed Step 1 as you do refer back to it. The desired results codes you're going to pull from your Stage 1. So you're going to pull all your transfer goals and all of your meaning goals for your performance task. The performance task is those assessment pieces which students need higher order thinking in order to do the task. They have to complete something that is going to make sure that they transfer their learning to a different setting and to a different realm. So for example, this isn't where you're going to have any of your quizzes or your observations. This is going to be more of a project-based learning style, and you want to make sure that it is complex, making your students really think, and you don't have any yes or no, right or wrong answers. Your performance task is going to be based on what answer did they find? Did they use those standards and competencies in order to find that answer correctly? So you're going to put your code here. So if you had transfer goal 1, you just type T number 1 there that you wanted to make sure to reference. And then over here, you're actually going to list what those students are going to be able to do. So you're going to label it, students will be able to show that they really understand by evidence of what. So an example would be if I had a transfer goal of being able to do math in real life. Maybe I want them to create a shop and act like they had some customers. What do those customers buy? Figure out the prices. Something that transfers their learning to a new setting. They would show me that understanding during the performance task. The evaluative criteria is going to be what criteria you're going to evaluate those students on. So regardless of what assessment you are doing, you want to make sure that you know what qualities are most important. So performance task, if you were wanting them to understand a certain transfer goal, you wouldn't have something like, is it pretty for the design? Did the performance go well? You would want to make sure that you're really assessing their quality of work. And if performance is fine for your whatever level you're at, then that needs to be what you're doing. But you want to make sure whatever you are assessing and whatever your transfer goal is aligns with your criteria. All assessments are going to have criteria. That is how you're going to grade your students. There are 2 different types of rubrics that you can create, which I will talk about in a little bit, but you're going to use those rubric templates in order to base your criteria off of that. So you really want to make sure you're paying attention and understanding what criteria is important. And honestly, I think criteria is super important because your students will be able to gain feedback from you based on that. So performance task is where you would want to create a rubric later. So being a little bit more detailed in your criteria would be a good thing. Criteria just really help guide your evaluative judgment, and all students are going to agree on that beforehand. Students are able to self-assess with the criteria. It is just a super important part. Don't feel like you're going to have to implement every single one of these performance tasks. Maybe you pick and choose what to do, or maybe some students do one and another student does another, but making sure that you evaluate this to make sure that they can transfer their learning and actually understand your content. Going forward is going to be your other evidence. So this is everything else. So do you have assessments of knowledge, skill, standards, or other goals that are not otherwise assessed by the performance tasks? Meaning, is there anything else that you need to cover? So not every single assessment is going to be a performance task. That would generally just take too much time. It would take too much time, as well as be overwhelming. You don't want the students to have to do project after project. It's just not realistic for a real life setting. So that is where your other evidence comes in place. So this other evidence is going to be anything else that you gather throughout your unit or however long you're using the template for. So are you using any quizzes, tests, prompts, even observations or homework would work to understand the students, understand the meaning goals, skill, transfer goals, or any knowledge or skill goals. So for example, skill goals are a lot of observation based. If it is a skill that they can log on and they can create a Google Doc, well, you might be able to observe them logging on and creating a Google Doc. And that would be something that you would just notice and not necessarily have to assess with a rubric and certain performance task measures. You want to make sure that you are still putting your codes here because we're always going to be referencing back to stage 1. That is key in order to create this template correctly and really getting the most out of it. And then this is where you're going to put if it is going to be a quiz, and you're going to say students will demonstrate the achievement of the desired results by, and then you're going to list out that evidence there. And then in the other evidence evaluative criteria, this is where you're going to list what criteria you're going to be looking at in order for the desired results. So what is most important? So if on a quiz you're looking for quality, then you're going to put the content there. Or on the quiz, are you looking that they follow directions? In which case you might put performance there. Just making sure that you relate back to explicitly what you're assessing for. And then down here, I think honestly is probably one of the most important things that you can use for the UbD template. It is going to be the grading rubric. So you're just going to pick one of your performance task assessments. Now, if you would like to then create another rubric for a different one, or you could use the same rubric again, that's completely fine. The criteria listed in the first column of the rubric is the same as that criteria that you listed in the table. So up here, whatever you listed on this side, you're going to make sure that you put it here for your criteria. So you're just now listing it out and being really descriptive. You want to type in what your performance task is in this section, why you used it, and what the students are going to be doing. And then you're actually going to be breaking down that criteria into what you want to see for an exemplary student, a sufficient grade. Maybe they need revision, or maybe there's just no evidence there. Maybe a student forgot to do something or left something off, and that is going to be 0, so no evidence. So criteria 1, you want to make sure that you are labeling these as something the students can then use as feedback later as well, and it not be subjective. So if I want to list out something for content and I just say has 3 sentences for a good paragraph, well, are you really judging how many sentences they have, or did you want them to be relating back to a text or key ideas and details? So making sure that you're really being specific, because that's something that rubrics often people mess up on, because they say that they want the content here and that students should have a good paragraph, but then they go on to say 3 sentences, 4 to 5 sentences, 3 sentences, 2 sentences, and 1 sentence. Well, in reality, the sentences could be nonsense, and the student could get a 4 in that category, having no actual content versus the actual content. So for example, if I was looking at the content of a paragraph where students had to reference a text or create something, I would want to make sure that I am using that for my target goals. So I always look at this like I am a student and I say, okay, well, if I was doing this and I was being assessed, would this then follow those standards and competencies that I had to know from stage 1? A lot of the times, those professors and those teachers need to tell those students what standards and goals they want the students to achieve. That way, the students can then reference in their actual performance task as well as on their rubric. So you want to make sure you're being specific here and actually giving the student what you need. You also want to make sure that it eliminates bias from your grading. So if you see a criteria that you're like, oh, well, a student could try really hard and get exemplary, whereas a student who has good information and actually followed the standard but didn't have a pretty article would then get sufficient, and that would be a bias. So you want to make sure that you're referencing exactly what you want the students to achieve and then exactly what they're going to transfer that learning into. And then that's just going to be the end of our Stage 2 UBD template. And I hope that you enjoyed it and learned something. Have a great day.